Okay, so it's going to go into live stream, and that should work pretty. I'll just copy that link so we can just post that up there. Sorry. Here we go. Here's the link. Post it up there. And I'll just post that there as well. Sorry, Graham. 2 seconds and I'll be there. Okay, let me post that there. Here we go. All right, so here we go. I think this is it. All right, so here we are. I think this is all working, and it should be all hunky-dory, but yeah, we'll see how we go. All right, so good evening, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Welcome to another edition of the Sydney Saxophone Network Q&A sessions. It has been a little while, so hope you are keeping well and doing well, of course. It has been a little while, I know, but with things sort of starting to fire up, hopefully we'll be able to get a bit more of a regular sort of bunch of Q&As happening. So yeah, please stick with us and subscribe and keep on top of what's happening there. So tonight we're just trying out something a little bit different. We're actually doing a live stream. And when I say live stream, there's actually about a 30-second delay, but it is live-ish nonetheless. So it is a little bit of a different format, but hopefully it's a little bit more accessible to people. If you do have a question for our guest tonight, you are more than welcome to post a comment in the chat on the YouTube, and I can read that out to our guest and see how we go. Speaking of which, we should get past my rambling and get on to the main event, who is, of course, our main guest this evening, who is Graham Jesse. Now, Graham doesn't need any introduction because he is a local legend of the music scene, but I'll give you a brief recap, because if I did give a full recap, we'll probably be here all evening. But Graham is quite a prolific performer, composer, arranger, producer, and he has done so much for the Australian music scene over the last 30 years or so. And he has, you know, from an early age, managed to work with some phenomenal musicians, phenomenal groups. Most notably, of course, he played with the Channel 9 Midday Show Studio Orchestra. He was not only just a performer, but soloist, arranger, and he got to work with a large array of various acts and artists for that. So it was a huge ensemble and huge opportunity. But you know, on top of that, he's done a tremendous amount of other things as well. He's worked in various concert halls, jazz clubs, various groups and ensembles, and composing, co-leading, you name it, he's done it all. But I will let him talk about all these things because, as I said, it's I often get rambling and I don't really want to do that. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Graham. Thank you, Graham, for joining us tonight.
Thanks, Nathan. I'm really looking forward to this. And also thank you for putting all these Q&As on. I think they're very interesting. I've listened to quite a few.
Oh, thank you. And yeah, it's great to have you a part of it as well. So I'm sure we'll have a lot of fun tonight. Just easing into this evening's Q&A, this is a question I ask all the guests. What made you get into saxophone? What made you gravitate towards the saxophone?
Well, I don't think I really chose the saxophone. It's more like the saxophone chose me. My dad played the trombone, so there was a lot of music in my house when I was little. Not that I have much recollection of that, but when I was in year 3, my primary school started a recorder band.
Okay.
And I remember being a bit shy. I wasn't sure if I wanted to do it, but anyway, my parents gave me a bit of a push. And the teacher who was putting that recorder band together was John Spate. Don't know if you know that name. But John Spate, he was a piano player, and he worked with my dad. And later on, he was the person who started and ran the Manly Jazz Festivals for many, many years. And I think his daughter's still doing that. His son's a very good alto player.
Yeah, of course.
So anyway, John Spate started this recorder band, and I remember turning up at school and I was handed a wooden recorder and a fingering chart. And pretty much from that day onward, I was just hooked on music. It just made sense to me. I found I could play tunes by ear, tunes I heard on the radio. And I think recorder's a great way for little kids to start because it's a very simple instrument. It's just a tube, and as you lift up your fingers, the pitch goes up. So that's how I got started into music. And I just loved it. Cool. John Spack used to have rehearsals at school. He'd play the piano, and he'd written out these simple standards for us to play on the recorder. So then a year or two later, my dad took me to the Police Boys Club, which had a band.
Yeah.
And it was pretty much a brass band with a few reed instruments. So they gave me an alto saxophone. I think it was a beat up old Con. And we also got lessons from one of the members of the police band, I suppose. So that's, once again, I took the saxophone home with my tuner day book. And to my delight, I discovered, wow, the fingering's pretty much the same as the recorder. How about that? So once again, I just loved it. The only thing was the teacher I had, he was a lovely man, but not a particularly good teacher. So I wasn't really given much direction about embouchure, and I ended up with, a lot of kids too, I think, like a really tight embouchure clamped onto the saxophone. Sort of feeling like the more effort I put in, the more was going to come out, and getting caught up in the emotion of music as well. So, yes, that's the only thing. I mean, I got pretty good ears. I could play the thing, but it actually took me a long time to develop what I would call a good embouchure now.
Okay.
But by comparison, when I was 14, I got a flute for my birthday, and I had lessons with a man called Victor McMahon.
Okay.
Who was an old man at that point, and he actually had taught Don Burrows flute.
Oh wow!
And they were just group classes on a Saturday morning. I loved going in there, and Victor was just the best teacher. It felt like he spent half the lesson telling jokes. We just had a great time, but when we played, he just focused on the basics. Making sure you're holding the flute so it's not going to fall out of your hands. He had big drawings all around the room of a flute embouchure and directing the airstream and getting us to do these exercises, practicing directing the airstream. So the flute has always felt quite like natural to me, and I've never struggled with the flute, whereas the saxophone, as much as I love it, I did struggle a bit just, getting the thing to feel easy to play. And from then in high school I did elective music, and in that era there was a lot of focus on 4-part vocal writing. So I studied all that, cadences, harmony, a lot of analysis of classical music. So that actually formed the basis for what I did when I became a professional musician and arranging. It's a really good basis doing that 4-part vocal writing. So, and I'm still playing saxophone at that time, and I think in my final year of high school I got my first gig playing in a club.
Nice.
Just mainly playing by ear, and they had what was called a floor show, which was a cabaret act, would bring the charts and you'd read that.
Okay.
And that was the sort of work my dad used to do. Well, he started off in the big band era, but then he worked in the clubs a bit, so that was sort of my reference point, I suppose. And then also in my final year of high school, the Con brought out Howie Smith to start teaching jazz at the Con. I think Don Burrows had been agitating for a while to have jazz taught at the Con. So they brought out this guy, Howie Smith, and he happened to be a saxophone player and an arranger.
Nice.
So I remember doing some improv classes there, and I think Cole Lockman became involved, and I started having some lessons with Cole, and that's when I started to really get into the whole embouchure thing. Started to actually understand how to get the tone happening.
Oh, he's really big on that, as some of our previous guests might have seen before. But very much in that Allard method and all that.
That's it. Yeah. So anyway, Cole was my first proper teacher.
Okay.
Even though I was already gigging and everything at that stage, I was kind of a bit self-taught up to that point.
Okay.
Um,
Cool.
yeah, so that's sort of how I got started. And so then I met people at the con. They're still my friends. We had sort of bands. I joined a band with Kerry Bedell, the singer.
Mm-hmm.
The band was called Compared to What. And I don't know if you know much about Kerry, but she was just an absolute fabulous singer. And her thing was, okay, it's a band. It's not a singer plus band. So about 50% of what we did in performances were instrumentals, featuring the band. And she would sing along with me, the melodies. So I'd be playing a Chick Corea tune on the soprano. Kerry would be singing that same melody, and she's got impeccable pitch.
Wow.
So that was a big learning curve for me. Yeah.
Huge. All right.
So already along the way, I met all these people who just gave me a really great leg up.
Right. Yeah. Well, that sounds great. It sounds like like you've had like a wealth of an upbringing in music, which certainly makes a huge difference in terms of growing up in that sort of musical background. And you say your dad was a musician as well. What did he play?
Trombone.
Trombone. There you go.
And he loved Louis Armstrong, Count Basie, Duke Ellington. So I heard all of that as a kid, and I actually found it sounded really old-fashioned to me, even as a kid, because of the older recordings. Mm-hmm. I didn't really dig it much, but it sort of goes in there. So I can play a pretty good Dixieland clarinet. It's actually quite fun. I know the style.
Nice.
So as I got older, I started to appreciate, Ellington and Count Basie and all those.
Cool. All right. So obviously you've you sort of had a really great upbringing, went to the con and studied with some great people, but also got to meet people and develop that kind of working relationship with some phenomenal musicians. Did you happen to do any traveling overseas and maybe approach some people at all for some studying or lessons or just jamming?
I did, yeah. Well, before that, I actually enrolled at Sydney Uni, which was at that time separate from the con, as a composition student.
Oh wow!
But I wasn't quite ready for it. I wasn't really enjoying it. And I was gigging so much. I was enjoying that part of it, and I also got offered a job with the Daly-Wilson Big Band in my second year of uni, and that they were doing a tour of Australia. They needed a saxophone quickly, and I think Howie had recommended me. So that was actually a pretty easy decision to make.
Fair enough. Yep.
Stay at uni or tour with this premier big band. So that in that band, Doug Foskett was the lead alto player, who was instrumental in getting me involved in a lot of other things. But getting back to going overseas, there was Greg Quigley was a promoter who brought out a whole bunch of jazz musicians. He put on like a jazz festival, concerts and workshops. And I think this was maybe, around that time, my second year of uni. And he brought out probably a dozen or 15 of these fabulous American musicians, including Dave Liebman. So I attached myself to Dave Liebman a bit, hung out with him.
Nice.
And he said, look, come over to New York and study, And he mentioned this person, Joe Allard, as did one of the other sax players.
Right.
So I got Joe Allard's contact details, probably from Dave, and wrote to him, and eventually got a letter back. This is pre-electronic communications, of course. And he said, I'll give you some lessons. So in my mid-20s, I took off to New York with two friends, and Mike Bartolome and Dave Panicki. And I was there for 9 months. I had probably about a dozen lessons with Joe Allard. I had lots of lessons with Dave Liebman, Eddie Daniels.
Wow. I
studied composition with a lady called Ludmilla Ulela, who taught at the Manhattan School of Music. She was a classical contemporary composer. They were fantastic. So that was like a huge learning period for me. We also, 3 or 4 times a week, we'd go out to jam sessions, gigs, concerts. It was a really fantastic time.
Yeah, wow. That's phenomenal. And, you know, the caliber of those musicians. And,
Yeah,
yeah, wow, what a vibrant time. That's cool.
it was. Yeah.
Nice. I mean, you know, we can sort of talk about this all day, but I would really like to, like, you've studied with some phenomenal people, and it'd be really great to maybe ask you, were there any particular teachers or mentors that you encountered that really stood out for you in your mind? And if so, what was it, or what lesson was valuable that you took from those people?
Yeah. Well, first of all, Victor McMahon, my flute teacher.
Yep.
Just fabulous teacher. Cole was great. Joe Allard, he's such a character. Yeah, I mean, I don't think I ever played more than about 8 or 10 bars for the lessons. It was just all tone production. That's it. Overtones, playing with the mouthpiece. He used to quote, not Einstein, for every action there is an equal and opposite reaction.
Newton.
Isaac Newton used to quote that to me, and then he talked about hearing Coltrane play and then seeing Charlie Parker, and then the next lesson he'd be talking about his oboe friend and how their embouchure amount of lip on the reed. And he was just a very, he had a very real inquiring mind. Yeah, so Joe Allard, fabulous. Dave Liebman, really great. He's so generous. He just, first lesson, just laid everything out. Okay, yeah, come back next week or come back in 6 months. This is what you got to work on. And actually, my first lesson with Dave Liebman, I played something, and he said, "Oh, well, yeah, you've got some of the Coltrane stuff happening, but only on a superficial level."
Wow.
But, you know, I mean, I sort of respond to having a bit of a kick up the backside. Yeah, so Dave Liebman was fantastic. Yeah.
Cool. All right.
And
phenomenal.
mentor-wise, here, Julian Lee, I don't know if you know that name.
Afraid I don't, sorry.
Blind piano player.
Okay.
Originally from New Zealand, who lived in LA for a while and worked. His main thing was arranging and playing piano. He's blind.
Okay.
Kerry Bedell also. Don Burrows. Don Burrows was my hero.
Yep.
That's why I wanted to play the flute.
Same. Like listening to Don play when I was a kid, it was something that really got my interest into learning flute. However, I was really terrible at it, so I didn't really pick it up till much later. But I always still listen to a lot of his flute recordings. They're just amazing, the sound he produces on that instrument. Yeah.
Yeah, well, that was his first instrument. Yeah, and then clarinet. Yeah, saxophone. Okay. But yeah, Don. So Don, I really admire Don. He's a fantastic player.
Nice. All right. So moving on, in terms of like all the fantastic people and everything. Just finally, before we move on from that point, was there a particular lesson or a point or some sort of an epiphany that might have, or light bulb moment that you had with one of these people that, well, first of all, what would have that been? And second of all, what did it do to help you sort of propel your musicianship? And
it was probably Joe Allard, I think.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, he just pretty much in that first lesson got me to feel much more at home getting a good sound on the saxophone. I had my tenor with me. When I went to New York, I was going through my obsession with Coltrane, Michael Brecker, and
fair enough.
Yeah. So yeah, he was just very special. Yeah.
Nice. All right. Well, moving on. One thing I really want to ask you is because you've as we've sort of discovered, you have a wealth of musical sort of fingers in musical pies, so to speak, in terms of what kind of styles and different sorts of things that you're really into. What are some of your major musical influences for you currently that you're into, and what about those influences appeal to you?
Currently, well, that's...
Sorry, it's a bit of a loaded question.
Yeah. Look, I've got pretty, I think, eclectic musical tastes, because going back to my youth, I was studying classical music at school, and then I was doing all these sort of commercial gigs on the saxophone, and so I had this parallel thing going for a long time. When I discovered Stravinsky, I just thought that was just amazing right at spring. A person that I just not so long ago discovered is a singer called Jacob Collier.
Oh yeah, he's
English guy.
He's nuts. It's in a good way.
In a good way.
Yeah.
So I just his version of Moon River is just phenomenal, and visually as well. If you watch it on the big screen. So I've been listening to him a bit. I'm not sure who else to say. I've sort of been going back a little bit because I'm teaching I've got a couple of high school kids teaching improv.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been going back to some of the early Miles stuff because his solos are super lyrical. Yeah.
Nice. Okay, cool. All right, now moving on, I'd love to talk about your playing career. There's so much of it we can talk about, but I think one of the big things my dad's also a musician, and he saw you on the Midday Show, and or the Channel 9 band, sorry, I should say. And a colleague of mine from work also used to work in that band as well. So
Who's that?
Dave Armstrong.
Oh yes, I know Dave.
Yeah. So
what did your dad play?
He was a bass player and a singer back in the day.
Okay.
He like you actually sort of grew up in the club scene. I was sort of my mum was a singer as well, so I kind of got babysat in RSL clubs and bowling clubs when I was very young, back in the days when you could. So that kind of explains a lot of my quirks, maybe. But so just going on to the Channel 9 band. Now, for those who don't know, the Channel 9 band, was probably an amazing opportunity for any musician in town at the time. It was a regular gig. You get to play music, you get to work with heaps of great musicians. But maybe you can tell us a bit about this band because you were there, you lived it.
Yeah, well, the show had been going for a year or two, I think, and then Jeff wanted to increase the size of the band. He wanted to add a sax player and a trumpet player. So I got the job then through that guy, Doug Foskett, who was the lead alto player in the daly-wilson band. Jeff Harvey was the conductor, the MD. And Jeff's mission was to keep music front and center of that show. Right, it was an integral part of the show, and so he would do all sorts of things. We'd do band numbers. We'd do sort of the occasional novelty tune featuring someone. He'd have a competition where people would send in photos of their suburb or their street, and every week they want to get chosen, and the band member would write a tune for that. So, and Jeff also was a very funny guy. He had a good comedic sense of timing, and he was very well loved. So, but basically we'd turn up there at 9:30 in the morning, charts would be handed out, we'd have a music rehearsal with the singers, take a break, then we'd have camera rehearsal with those songs, and then get changed, do the show. It was all live at midday. So wow. It was, and it was different every day. Some days very challenging, other days it was pretty straight, a lot of those singers who did the clubs. But pretty much anyone who had a tour coming up, and a lot of overseas people who had tours coming up, they'd go on the show to promote it because the show had a huge audience in its heyday. Yeah,
well, of course it did. I'd imagine like being in that club circuit, like, you get handed a bunch of charts, just before you hop on, and you got to lug a lot of these charts. So I imagine it'd be the same sort of scenario with this band.
It was the same scenario, except that they had to be a bit better than perhaps the average club band.
Yeah. Of course. Yeah.
Yeah. So some of the singers would bring their own charts, but quite a lot got written specifically for the show. So Ron Fulson used to write charts, David Basden. And a bit later on, I just said to Jeff, "Oh, by the way, Jeff, I do arrangements." And he said, "Okay, do this." He gave me one that wasn't going to go to air the next week or whatever. It was something that he could try out on a slow day.
Okay.
Yeah. And we played it, and he liked it. So after that George Brodbeck, sorry, I was trying to think of George's name. George was another writer for that show, did a lot.
Okay, yeah, well... sorry.
So a lot of the charts were written specifically for the show.
Okay, yeah, because
so not only, sorry to interrupt, not only did it employ a lot of musicians, it employed, 2 or 3 arrangers and 2 or 3 copyists.
Right, so separate to the musicians in the band, there were designated arrangers and copyists.
Yeah.
Wow, that's huge. Yeah, that's like...
Because sometimes they'd have, they'd add a big string section, they have a big orchestral thing. I think Randy Crawford, the singer, was on one day, and there's, big string section, percussion, keyboards, big horn section. Yeah, so those charts have got to get written.
Well, yeah, of course, yeah. And I'd imagine the time constraints would have been quite enormous as well, like with probably a finite amount of time to get, from starting from scratch to presenting it up on the bandstand,
Yeah. Yeah, I had a copyist who used to pick up my scores from my place. Ron Brown is his name is. Pick them up in the afternoon, go home, work through the night, and then deliver them to the studio the next morning.
Wow, it's huge. Well, I would love to talk about your arranging a little bit later, because there's sort of got a little bit of a script. I don't always stick to it, but we'll see how we go. But just before we move on with that, as I said, you've been with that band for many, many, many years, and you had various roles in the section as a soloist, arranger, and all sorts of things. But are there any particular highlights that you can recall from your time in this band?
Well. Yeah, but one was Randy Brecker came out to Australia to promote his new album.
Nice.
But I don't think he did gigs in clubs. He just came out, maybe it was part holiday or something. But anyway, and I got the job of writing the chart. Randy didn't have the chart. So I just got a recording of this track. So I arranged it, and there was an 8-bar section in it that was... Randy using his his splitter, how his trumpet sound used to be split into 3 or 4 notes, and it was I don't know, random pitches, but he likes all those suspended harmonies. So there's an 8-bar section like that, and it took me about 8 hours to just transcribe that and arrange it, because it was just the harmonies were a bit unusual. But anyway, so I did the chart, and I've still got somewhere. The trumpet part, it says, yes, toe to toe, arranged by Graham Jesse, and it says trumpet 1 in brackets Randy. It's a nice keepsake.
Oh, of course. Did you get him to sign it?
No, I should have. No, but so he turned up. We did the rehearsals, and he looked over and said, "Yeah, man."
Nice.
So he gave me a bit of a compliment for the writing.
Ah, fantastic. Now, talking about some other things as well, so moving on from there, like obviously you've had a great experience, and it really sort of helped a lot in your career, but you're also an outstanding soloist and band leader in your own right, of course. You've had an array of different projects as frontman in various things. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about some of these projects that you got going on.
Yeah, well, I was quite busy, just doing gigs, sessions, etc. But I did want to put out some recordings of my own, which I eventually got to. And the first one was called Reflections. And for me, the funnest part about that is calling up all these musicians that I admired, some of who I had worked with a lot and others I'd never worked with, and say, hey, can you do a session for me? I want you to play on my album. So I'd written a whole bunch of stuff, and hired a studio and an engineer that I'd worked with quite a bit doing sessions for them. And so I did 2 under my own name, and another one I did with Adrian Cunningham, the 2 of us, as a two horn player kind of thing. And I've worked a bit with a singer called Bonnie Jensen. I co-produced her latest album, which is called Shimmer. And that, I think that's a really nice album. We've got Matt McMahon on piano, James Muller on guitar, Phil Fack on bass. So that's a nice album. So it's a bit of a labour of love, especially in this era of streaming.
Yeah.
You don't really make your money back. But it's something I like to do. The money I earn from the commercial gigs, I think back into doing those sort of things.
Yeah, for sure. And like you have, so on your website you've got listed Reflections, of course, and
Yeah.
the duo album that you got with Adrian. So
Yeah.
if you guys are interested in checking those out, highly recommend. I'm going to be doing that as soon as I get a bit of teaching money in my account. That's So lots of different projects as a front man, of course. You've also worked in various sessions and with groups as a section player. So of course we had mentioned the Daly-Wilson Big Band was a big experience for you. Also the Sydney All-Star Big Band, of course, as well. Maybe you could tell us a bit about that one.
Well, that's run by my good friend Ralph Pyle, trumpet player. Very, very fine trumpet player. Ralph loves big bands. I think that's his the thing that he loves the most. And so he's put this band together, and he's had it together for a long time. So I think the first album's called Doing Our Thing, and the second one's called Pile Driver. And there's a couple of my tunes on each of those. Ralph, said, "Oh, guys, I'd like to do an album," and he just put a call out for some charts to be written. Actually, both charts on the first one were songs that I'd already written and I'd recorded with a small group, and then adapted for big band.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
And is the group sort of still, well, obviously not at the moment, but is it intending to still be working and gigging in the future, or?
I think so, yeah, because Ralph, sometimes James Morrison works with a big band, and Ralph is James's go-to man to put a big band together. So it's
cool.
Also, Tom Burlinson, who does his Sinatra show. Yes. Yep. So that's the Sydney All-Star Big Band that works with him when it's a big band.
Right. Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
All right. So keeping busy with that. Fantastic.
Yeah.
Now you also work with a lot of commercial things as well. So for those who might remember, Australian Idol, you were in the band for that, and did some arranging for that as well, I believe.
Yep. Did a bit of arranging for that because one of the years they had, I think it was Rock Swings or something was the theme. Anyway, they had all the singers sing with the big band, like a sort of jazz flavored pop songs. That sort of approach. Yeah. So I wrote some charts for that.
Cool.
And I was playing in the band for that.
How did that differ from your experience working with the Channel 9 band?
Well, the Channel 9 experience was it was live to air, right? So it was much more immediate. You had to be on your toes. Whereas by the time Idol came around, there was a bit more post-production going on. So maybe it was live. I can't quite remember actually. But it was a similar thing, yeah.
Okay.
But the Midday Show it was 5 shows a week, so there was a lot more going on.
Yeah. Well, 5 shows a week.
The Idol was a good experience, yeah.
Oh yeah, it was. I remember it as well. It was like great seeing live bands backing a lot of these artists. Where at that time it was sort of becoming the flair for backings and backing tracks and all that stuff. So it was good to actually see that. All right. Now, another thing that I found out in my research was you've recorded with Silverchair. Is that right?
I played on one of their albums, not as a soloist. It's,
right.
I think the album's called Diorama, maybe.
Oh, yeah.
And Larry Mahobrak did all the arrangements, the American guy.
Right.
Sadly no longer with us. So that's actually a really good album. It's a little bit like Silverchair going a little bit in the direction of the Sgt. Pepper's thing, having some big orchestral stuff and a little bit different. So yes, no, I'm not. Didn't have a solo to play or anything. It was just in the orchestra, but it's.
Oh no!
I was
a big fan of that album when I was back in the day, and I was just doing a bit of Google searching. I was just like, oh wow, it's really quirky but cool. So it's amazing.
Yeah.
So in term, like you've had a wealth of experience gigging with, and again, I think this is a testimony to your how do we put it, the multifaceted nature of your interests in what you like to do and projects you like to do and get involved in, and your versatility as a musician. Were there any particular concert or performance memories that you felt were really quite memorable so far in terms of your career? Like, is there something that really stands out as like, wow, this is like a once in a lifetime gig?
Well, talking about multifaceted and doubling, West Side Story, I think, is, for me, is like one of the best musical scores ever. And I did it with a conductor called Brian Stacey, who unfortunately died in a motorcycle accident. But I did the production that opened the Capitol Theatre when it reopened. I think it was in 1995 or something.
Okay.
But that is just a great piece of music. And, you know, as a doubler, it's just, you know, if I got there half an hour before start time, I was running late because I had to get like 6 instruments out and get the reeds going and tune them all up. So it was, you didn't have time to get bored or anything.
Yeah.
But that music is fabulous.
No, it's a great book, and yeah, you're right. Like, it's one of those books where you really need everything and the kitchen sink on top of that to play.
And it's got a bass saxophone in the score as well. It
does. If anyone's planning on doing West Side Story,
you're available.
I am available at the moment. Not much else going on. That ties in really nicely with the next question. In terms of, we should have mentioned this earlier, of course, but like we talked about how, you know, you've studied flute and then picked up clarinet, and to this day you are a renowned multi-instrumentalist and doubler, and consequently that's sort of thrown you into that world of shows, and, you know, you do a lot of work in that area of music as well. But just would love to pick your brain in terms of how do you maintain such a high caliber of proficiency across all these instruments at one time?
Well, maybe I don't. So, yeah, if a gig's coming up and I've got to play clarinet, for example, then I'll woodshed that as it's coming up. If I'm preparing for a musical, especially if I'm depping for someone, because that's how I got into it in the first place. So I was a bit too busy to do that sort of work early on in my career. But I used to dep for people. So and these days, if you can get a video recording of the conductor and that's got the audio there, so you can kind of play along with them. But I'll set up all my instruments here in the stands in the order that they are and play along. So I get used to, you know, the amount of time it takes to pick it up, getting your embouchure set for the different instruments. So sort of structured, methodical practice, I suppose, is the way to do it. And like I say, if I've got something coming up with piccolo in it, I'll get that out and start practicing it. I don't sort of practice all my horns on a daily or a weekly basis. It's saxophone. Saxophone is my main mode, I suppose, and flute. They're the two things that I go to and I love playing.
And then you just get to the rest when the necessity is there.
Well, I mean, I love the clarinet in good hands. It's a wonderful instrument. But that was the last one I came to, and I still find it a bit tricky at times, shall I say. Okay,
interesting. Now, you were just curious to ask, because you said that you sort of got started with musical theatre in terms of depping, and it's just sort of right place, right time is sort of, I guess, the scenario that was there, and then from there you managed to get in that click. Is that sort of how that came about for you?
That's pretty much it. Right place at the right time, and also if it's a long run, players will need depths usually. So if you're available and you're happy to put in all the practice time on your, for free, because you got to. Well, depending on the score, some of them are pretty straightforward. But some of them are pretty hard. So if you're prepared to put in the work, and then that is a good way to get into it. Unfortunately, I think the trend has been that the pit bands are getting smaller and smaller. They use tracks more, and they've got more keyboards. and the keyboard player might be playing the clarinet part, and the keyboard player is playing clarinets 2 and 3. So yeah, I mean that West Side gig that I mentioned, that was a big orchestra. It was the pit was they'd taken the front couple of rows of seats out. Big string section. There was a grand piano in the pit. 6 woodwind multi-doublers. Marjorie Smith was in that production.
Oh yeah, cool.
Playing all the clarinets. Yeah, I
Nice.
remember Marge. Yeah.
Yeah, no, West Side's a huge. Like I've done the full film score orchestral version, and it's just the amount of instruments in there is insane. Like in order to get that big fat sound that Bernstein wanted, like you need all that different tone color and variety in there. So it's really hard to reproduce on keyboards, I'd imagine.
Yeah, well, I don't know that they would go the keyboard route with that, but I'm just talking about other shows.
Okay.
Yeah, other shows. It's the trend now is to have 1 or 2 trumpets, maybe 1 French horn, couple of saxophone / flute, whatever, and then 2 or 3 keyboards and maybe some track as well.
Okay.
But maybe that trend will change.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
Nice. Now, I think we talked about this before, but you mentioned West Side Story is probably one of your most favourite experiences. But was wanting to ask is that probably your most favourite book to play on a theatre show, or is there another book that you prefer to do?
Depends if you want to be like sitting on the edge of your seat all night. West Side's a little bit like that.
Yeah.
But the music is fabulous. Oh, look, most of them have got their things about them that you can enjoy. I did Hot Shoe Shuffle. I actually wrote some charts for that as well. That's the David Atkins local production. That's quite fun to play because it's just all big band stuff basically.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
All right. And was that the same with An Officer and the Gentleman as well? Because you pretty much did the orchestration for that as well.
I did the orchestration for that. Yeah, I didn't play in the band for that.
Okay.
A bit of a story with that. It was an American production team who wanted to, because it was a movie originally. They turned it into a musical, and they wanted to trial it in Sydney to see how it went before they took it to Broadway.
Okay.
So, unfortunately, the critics hated it, and it got absolutely panned. The only thing that didn't get panned, that didn't get a mention at all, were the orchestrations. So I thought,
dodged a bullet, I guess.
Yeah, they hated the script. They didn't like because there was some songs from the movie. There was a whole lot of other original songs. They didn't like them. They didn't like the set. They just, and that's the power the critics have. They actually just killed that show.
Jeez.
I was thinking, hey, this could be good. I could be travel around as the musical supervisor or whatever, having done all the arrangements. So that was a lot of work too, because they were sort of developing the show. At the time, I was doing the orchestrations, and things had changed. Bars would be taken out, added, songs changed. That's a huge amount of work, and I was happy with how it turned out, but unfortunately, it didn't go anywhere.
Oh, that's a shame. Well, maybe we'll hear at least a recording of the score at some stage. Maybe, who knows?
Maybe, yeah.
Maybe. Now, with all this musical theatre stuff, a lot of questions that get asked by young musicians, like particularly students who recently graduate from the con or something like that, and they're looking to sort of break it into a scene like this. What advice or what sort of things would you advise these younger musicians to help them make it or break into this particular scene?
Look, I'm possibly not the best person to ask because the scene has changed so much over my career. But I suppose you could start doing, if you get offered any sort of gig in that sort of genre, do it. You've got to be up on your skills. You've got to be strong in probably 3 instruments at least. I don't know. Try and do a bit of networking. I thought there's some younger players around now in the saxophone field that do well in that. Abby McCann
Yep.
is getting lots of work in that field. So I'm not sure what else to say, but if that's really what you want to do, then you've got to get your chops up on multiple instruments.
Right.
Yeah.
Nope, understandable. Yeah, well, you need to, particularly as a woodwind. Like,
yes,
you won't be able to fudge some of those books, that's for sure.
No.
I actually did miss a question before. I do apologise. Folks, I do apologise. I am a little bit rusty with these, so I may have darted a little bit across the script, so I do apologise. But going on for that on a more broader context in terms of advice for younger musicians wanting to make a professional music career these days. I mean, you might have the same response because I know, as you were saying before, the scene's changed quite drastically since when you started to where it is now. But for like younger musicians, just sort of seeing how the scene is now, what sort of advice or things would you suggest that they look into? Is it things like, as you said, is it networking? Is there, getting up to jams, or is it trying to do things with fellow students and friends and try and put together projects of their own? What would be your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think all of the above.
Yep.
When I went to the con to study the jazz there, part of what you do, well, you would know this too, is you meet people, like-minded people, and they become a network. So that's a good thing to do. Look, I think the scene has changed a lot. But there's other genres of music that weren't around when I got started because of software. I did a session last week for a guy who I only knew as a recording engineer, very good engineer. But he was doing some, he called himself a sound artist. He was doing some sound design for a dance work. And so there's that whole side of it as well. Collaborating with friends is always good. I mean, I mentioned that band I was in many years ago with Kerry Bedell. We would get together once a week to practice every week. But we had regular gigs too. There's nothing like a regular gig to keep a band together.
Yeah, of course.
And I'm sure there's lots of little clubs and cafes and bars and things that do have bands that I'm probably not aware of because there's several generations between me and the younger people. I'm not sure if they pay that well. Would be good if they did.
Yep.
But yes, like everything that you said, networking, collaborating with friends, all of that. And I think the main thing is you've got to love it, because if it's not a huge passion, it's just too hard.
Yeah, exactly. It's a job, and then not great.
But and a job that's pretty hard to earn a living from as well.
Yeah.
And I think there's always, teaching is always probably going to be a part of it, except for a few people. Even when I was very busy at Channel 9, I still always had a couple of students. People would come to me or whatever. Yeah. Okay. No,
great sound advice, of course, and so going on from that, sorry, I'm a little bit frantic with my script, but it's all good. We're talking about like advice that you would give. One of the things I would like to talk about now is your diverse portfolio. So we've established that you had done some composition study, and you've done work as an arranger, producer as well, in terms of music, and there's like so many different hats that you wear, and they're always rotating through different things at different times. Why did you feel the need to branch out into these different sort of offshoots from performance? Well, not necessarily offshoots, but just different avenues of music.
I think because I love all aspects of music making. The danger is that you become a jack of all trades, and that applies to being a doubler as well. But I did a lot of sessions in the early days for commercials, jingles, albums, all of that sort of stuff. So I got to see what goes on in the studio, and I like technology too. So And I also was sometimes asked to book a horn section for a session, or book a band for a session. So that's pretty much what producing is. You coordinate the people that you want to work on the project.
Okay.
So for me, it was just I enjoy doing that. So I think they all intertwine.
Okay. Oh well,
and yeah. I mean, some ways it would be nice to just be a player you've got enough work that you can just focus on your one or two instruments. That would be fabulous. But I am drawn in many different ways. It's all fun.
This is very cool.
Hard work, but fun.
Yeah, well, as long as you have fun with it, that's the thing. Because I know producing and all composition and arranging is, it is quite full on, particularly depending on the scope of the project that you're working on at the time. Adding performance on top of that, it is quite a juggling act. But you seem to do it quite well. So, in terms of your arranging, like we had discussed, you sort of did a lot of arranging and things like that. How did you initially gravitate towards arranging, and was it from that sort of that early genesis that 4-part harmony that we talked about earlier, of how did you work on developing those skills?
Exactly. It was from when in high school I was writing stuff, and in fact for my HSC I did it was just called composition and arranging. So I had to submit one work that was a composition and then one arrangement. The composition was a Mozart style theme and variations for woodwind quartet, and the arrangement was some old English folk song. And I got together a woodwind quartet. I played the flute and I recorded on cassette. And so I suppose that was my first experience of getting a bunch of people together and producing a recording. So yeah, it's sort of been in my blood a bit. But for a long time, I was so busy doing just sort of gigging that it did fall by the wayside a bit.
Mm-hmm. So how did you work on like refining those arranging skills? Was it, I know we had a guest, Andrew Robertson, a while back, and he talked about transcribing different big bands and trying to emulate those sort of sounds. Was it a similar process for you, or is it something a bit more formalized, or was it something completely different?
Oh, no, a bit of both.
Okay.
Yes, analysis is good. Studying scores is good. And transcribing is probably the best. I've done quite a lot of, because sometimes when you get a job to do an arrangement, basically they just want a transcription. Mm-hmm. It's hard to beat a Nelson Riddle arrangement for Sinatra.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're just absolute classics. And then in fact his arrangements are part of the song. So I've transcribed quite a lot of those for Tom Berlins, and that was a great job. I'm getting paid to do an analysis.
Nice.
That's helping me, yeah. And if you're in a situation where you can hear them played, well, even better, of course. I mean, I know there's software that plays it back. That is helpful, but hearing played live is another level again, because the good stuff will sound really good, and anything that doesn't work will sound really bad. Whereas in MIDI, it all just it's a bit bland.
No, it's
hard to depict the highs and lows of MIDI.
Yeah, no, it's nothing really beats the real thing, that's for sure.
Oh,
like it's all those nuances, everything just come out much clearer, and phenomenal. In terms of saying someone who's wanting to work on arranging, would you suggest a similar approach in terms of developing their skills? Like, as you say, just analysis, transcribing, listening, same sort of thing? Like, just say, like, if someone who's got an interest in arranging but has no idea where to start.
Okay, well, first of all, you need to understand the instruments a bit. Mm-hmm. So get a book. I mean, my first book was Forsyth's Orchestration. Look, Google it. I mean, you can find all like the ranges of the instruments, the idiosyncrasies of them. So you've got to understand all of that. If you can go and sit in the middle of an ensemble somewhere, that's fantastic. Trombone. A lot of trombone players are very good writers, good arrangers, and I think that's partly because in the big band setting, they're dead center in the band, right? So they get to hear everything that's going on around them. That's just a theory of mine.
Hey, it makes sense though. Yes. Like real reaction.
Teach yourself about the instruments. try doing some yourself. As I said, you've got the software that can play it back for you. And if something really catches your ear, try transcribing it.
Okay, cool. No, very sound advice. Now, your composition work, now you've written a plethora of different things. I know that you've written recently a few sketches for a saxophone quartet, which I'm curious to check out with a few colleagues of mine. But in terms of your compositional work, well, for you, how does composition and arranging differ in terms of the thought process and the machinations of it, I guess?
Yeah. Interesting question because...
Sorry.
No, I like it because I've thought exactly the same thing. I think what works well for me is if I can write a melody or come up with some sort of groove and a set of chords, something like that. That's the tune. Then I sort of put my arranger's hat on and arrange that. Think, well, what else would I like to do with it? Where do I take it? Is there a variation I can do it, a development section, or whatever. So the two are quite entwined, I think.
Okay.
So composing, it's I don't find it that easy, to be honest. But the rewards can be great if you like what you're hearing, especially if your peers say, "Yeah, I like it." And if you will, I imagine nearly all composers do play an instrument. I think that can be helpful. Mm-hmm. When I had lessons from, I mentioned Ludmilla Eulalia, she asked, well, how do you compose? And I said, well, very smugly, onto a score paper. She said, well, do you use your instrument sometimes? Very few people can have the skill to just write, a beautiful piece of music with lots of things just purely on the score paper. I suppose if it's a standard format, you could.
Yep.
But I'm trying to do something a bit different. So I'll pick up a flute and muck around on it, pick up a saxophone, noodle away. Piano, I'm a very poor piano player, but I'll bang out a few chords. So it's that's the long answer. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Short answer is it's a mishmash of everything.
No, that's cool. That was another thing I was going to ask, and I think you already answered this already, was your compositional approach. By the sounds of it, seems like you sort of, it's sort of like a quasi-improvised thing, like you might sort of start with an idea or come up with an idea on an instrument and then workshop that idea. Is that kind of how it comes about? Yep,
definitely.
Yep.
And the other thing is it depends what you're writing for or what you want to write. So if I was going to be doing, say, some gigs or an album or something with, say, a very standard straight jazz quartet, then I'd just be writing a melody and chords pretty much, and I'd have an idea of what groove I wanted the rhythm section to do. If I'm writing it for big band, it's more detailed. If I was my last writing expedition was for flute and piano.
Okay.
It's called Chromatic Flight, and it's out on Move Records, and they sort of coming up with a bit of marketing for it. They called it classical crossover,
right?
Because I like to draw on lots of different influences and put them together, so hopefully it sounds as a whole. It's not like here's a bit of jazz and here's a bit of funk and here's some Mozart. Hopefully it all melds together. To create some kind of modern style of perhaps contemporary classical.
Yeah. Nice.
In fact, one of the good reviews I got made mention of that there's no, I don't know if you know that Claude Bolling piece for flute and jazz piano trio.
Yep.
Which was kind of quite groundbreaking in its time. But it is sort of the first bit, da, 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 da. It's pretty sort of classical, and then it goes into a jazz thing. So it's classical jazz, whereas I'm trying to sort of have the two of them intertwined all the way through.
So like a purely, I guess, an older term for it would be third stream, where sort of creating a mesh of the classical and the jazz world and creating your own unique voice that puts the two together in your own way.
Yeah.
Nice. All right. Cool. Now, in terms of we'll be wrapping up this side of things, but I want to ask: is there a particular composition or arrangement that you had a really fond memory of working on or workshopping with, or at least something that sort of maybe stands out in terms of not necessarily the end product, but maybe the writing process?
Of mine?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, my hit song is Pitt Street, which is popular with some saxophone quartets. And this was some time ago. I had bought a second-hand 8-track tape machine from a friend of mine. So I set it up in my little studio, and it's quite complicated. There's wires everywhere and the mixer and everything. And I was mucking around making sure that all the channels worked. So I just put a metronome on, and I was just playing this sort of basic bass line on the tenor, and then I put some semi-quaver patterns on top of it, and then something else. And I had it playing back, and my wife opened the door, stuck her head in, and she said, "Oh, that sounds like Pitt Street." That's how I got the name.
Nice one. Oh, well,
there was all these repetitive sixteenths that jump in and out.
No, I have played that work a few times, and done it with some students as well. It's a fantastic piece. It's really a lot of fun. I've had, it really does sort of showcase some great things and great writing. Like as I said, it's a lot of fun to play. Can't complain about it at all. It's fantastic.
Yes.
All right. Now, for folks playing at home on YouTube, we are sort of coming towards the end of this, but if you did have any questions, please feel free to type that up in the YouTube chat. I can read it out to Graham. Feel free to ask anything saxophone related, of course, or composition, arranging, anything else. But yeah, keep it music related, of course. But we'll see how we go. Now, Graham, coming back just in terms of the teaching. Now, you said you're doing a bit of teaching and have sort of been doing some teaching continuously throughout this whole time. How would you describe yourself in terms of your teaching philosophy? So if a student comes to you, what would be the approach that you would take with the student? I mean, obviously students are different, but what would be sort of the outcomes that you would like students to achieve with lessons with you?
Well, in a way, I model it on my favourite flute teacher, Victor McMahon. Mm-hmm. So focus on the basics.
Yep. And
especially if it's a young child, make it fun. If someone comes to me if I can see that they're struggling with the embouchure or whatever, we'll work on some long tones. It's stuff like scales and all of that. I try to get them to play them by ear, mm-hmm. learn the sound and the shape rather than reading a bunch of notes. So it's sort of focusing on the basics for starters: posture, breathing, embouchure, tone, hand position, keeping everything nice and relaxed and in posse, and then some fun tunes to play.
Nice.
Listening too. Mm-hmm. Not just lately. I've been handing out a sheet of paper to my students. Here's a big list of saxophone players. Mm-hmm. I want you to tell me which ones of them you like. So they've got to actually go and listen to something.
Cool.
Because otherwise it's just something they do. They'll have their tutoring and this and that, and then they'll come and have their saxophone lesson.
Yeah.
Except for some. I mean, I've had some students that are just, they love it and they find their own players that they like.
Yeah, but listening, it sure is a big thing. Like, it sort of contextualizes a lot of things that we do. Like, as you say, you can't just necessarily, do it with a sort of narrow vision. You got to have that sort of holistic thing, and getting a bigger picture of what it is you're doing is really important, particularly for younger kids to get that concept of sound and how things go, I guess.
Well, yeah, that's right. And the other thing is I've taught quite a few beginners as well. Mm-hmm. And I didn't like it so much when I was younger, but I quite enjoy it now. And I also figure that it's my duty to give young kids a pleasurable experience of learning music, because they're going to be the audience for anything but mainstream pop.
Yeah.
You know, kids are playing the band at school and the orchestra at school. They're going to go to an orchestral concert. They're going to go to a jazz club, you know, to an alternate music festival. So I think that's part of having. That's why the school band programs are so important, because it keeps other styles of music alive.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so Graham, this is a little bit of a tricky one. So I do apologise in advance, but if there was one thing that you wanted your students to take away from lessons with you, what would it be? Just one thing.
One thing.
Yeah.
Probably I would say be methodical with your practice.
Okay.
In fact, that's what I tell them.
Okay.
Be very structured, and then spend a bit of time just mucking around. But for most of your practice, be structured and methodical.
Okay. So does that involve like planning out sort of what you're going to do in that session, and then have a bit of time at the end for a bit of a free for all? I guess, I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay.
Have the metronome, write down the tempo that you're playing your scales at.
Yep. Nice one. Okay, cool. Now, Graham, we have a question from the gallery.
Yeah.
From Mike. He's asking, are all Graham's saxes the same make, or has he found different makers work better for him for the different sizes of sax?
Right. Well, I've got 5 saxophones here, and they're all Selmers.
Okay. And same brand, like Mark 6? Oh, sorry, model?
No, I've got actually, I've got a 1950s tenor with no lacquer on it. That is an absolutely beautiful horn. And I've got a 1970s tenor with lots of lacquer on it. It's a bit different. It's a bit brighter, but I tend to play that a lot of gigs because it looks better, depending on the gig.
Yep.
I have a 1950s alto that I bought recently that's been re-lacquered, and it sat in someone's cupboard for over 40 years.
Wow.
And when I tried it out, all the pads were shot. I could play a C sharp and it was a horrible B, and that was it, because the pads were just rotted. But it looks nice and it plays nice. It's got a sort of more small, sort of chunky sound, but I really like it.
Okay.
Now I have a 1970s alto that's got a big, bold, bright sound, and my soprano is a Series 3.
Oh, nice. Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
So, so obviously everything's sort of Mark 6 model, but the Series 3 for soprano. Was there a reason that you chose the Series 3 over a Mark 6 soprano? Yeah,
the Mark 6 sopranos are a bit, I don't know what word to use, but you know the palm keys? They're all in a row on the top. I mean, how awkward is that? My second soprano was a Yamaha.
Okay.
That was actually a beautiful instrument. It was the straight one piece, quite light, really beautiful tone. The Series 3 is a bit heavier. There's extra key work, and I like it. But sometimes I think, oh, it's so heavy. I really wish I had my Yamaha still.
Okay, interesting. No, very cool. Now, we're coming to the home stretch of things, so thank you, Mike. Hopefully that answers your questions there. Now, this is a bit of a topical question, because as of the date of the filming here, we are, as you may be aware, in the midst of this COVID-19 thing, and I'm pretty sure everyone's sick of hearing COVID-19. I know I am. But in terms of the music industry, it's affected all of us in terms of performance opportunities, teaching, every facet of the music industry has been affected with this. For you, obviously it's been a bit of a quiet time, so I mean it's obviously affected you in terms of gigs sort of not happening, but what sort of things have you sort of learnt during this time, or taken away from this? It's not a great time, but you know, there's things that we have to do to kind of adapt and try and find positive things to do, like could be practice or anything like that. What's some things that you've done, and what's some things that you could share that you've sort of learnt during this time?
Yeah, well, I've been keeping the practice up a bit, and getting back to my advice to students to be methodical. I've actually been a bit more methodical with myself.
Okay.
So, partly because I've had the time to do it. So that's one thing. I've also got a little bit better at using my recording gear here, because I've done a few online, the ISO recordings, lockdown recordings. Andrew Robertson, who's been quite prolific in that regard. I'm playing alto on his tracks. So he's done a great job. He's written the charts, mixed it. He's even done the video editing. I mean,
yeah, he's done the whole package.
Does he ever sleep?
Don't think he does.
So I've done a few of those. Check him out. I think he's called some Big Band at Home, the at symbol. Big Band at Home. Big Band at Home. So if you put in his name and that, you'll probably come up with a few things. So that's pretty much it. Yeah.
Okay. No, well, I mean, yeah, it's good to, and I think a lot of us have sort of learnt a lot in terms of the home studio recording stuff, just out of necessity. I know.
That's it.
Yeah, this last year was a complete shambles for a lot of people that I know, including myself, in terms of learning how to use it all. But it's just as like another skill that you can add to your toolbox, I guess, down the track. So. Yes,
it's still obviously much better to get, say, a horn section in a studio with a nice sounding room with a good engineer.
Oh, of course, of course.
But I'm hoping it's not fast tracking. Everything gets done at home.
Yeah.
But as you said, it's a great tool to have. Yeah.
I wouldn't say it would be the replacing, getting a group of musicians together, record together. That's sort of, you definitely wouldn't get the same interactions with the players and that same type of sound that you would get. So yeah, definitely. Yeah. If you're looking at getting a horn section, get a live one. Now I've got one more tricky one for you. Sorry, Graham. In Sydney or across Australia, obviously, as we said, COVID's sort of really, taken it for six. But what do you think would the music scene be like in a post-COVID world, or post-lockdown world, we should probably say, because COVID's going to be here for a while.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. I think it'd be more.
Lockdowns caused by politicians. As a reaction to COVID.
Yeah, but how would you see, what do you think would happen with the music scene once we get out of this lockdown? Like, how do you see it sort of developing or changing?
Yeah, look, I don't know that I'm the right person to answer that question, but maybe a sociologist or something. But being the ultimate, the eternal optimist, I'd like to think that things will spring back into shape, that maybe new things, some new venues could pop up, maybe some more long-term government assistance for many different styles of music. I'm not sure. I mean, I think during the lockdown, there's been more collaborations online, obviously, but I think that there'll be some good music coming out of that. But I'm hoping that we'll have the venues and the support and the financial support to be able to actually put them on.
Yeah, that's a big thing, isn't it? Like at the moment, there's so much uncertainty, even with the imminent opening up of Sydney. There's still a lot of unanswered questions as to what kind of shape or form concerts will take, and how long that's going to last. So, fingers crossed for a speedy recovery. But we'll see how we go. Now, on a lighter note, as I said, we're coming up to the end of the question. So anyone who's in the gallery at home, if you're wanting to ask a final question of Graham, please do so, because we're very much at the end. But this is a question I ask all the guests, and always interesting to hear the responses on this one. If you had just 10 minutes to practice, what would it be and why?
Okay. Can I give you two answers?
Okay.
Depending on if I felt like I needed to do some kind of maintenance and keep my chops happening, I would do a couple of minutes on the mouthpiece, then some long notes, and then maybe just a couple of scales from the bottom of the horn right up to the top, back down again.
Okay.
But this is answer number two. If I just have 10 minutes, I've got the saxophone there. I just play some tunes that I know that are quite, that are easy for me to play, a bit of improv, just so I can really appreciate the tone of the saxophone and just, touch base with the whole reason that I love doing what I love doing.
Nice one. Oh, very cool. All right. Well, Graham, thank you so much again for being involved this evening. That brings us to the end of the Q&A. Apologies for my rambling. I do have that tendency sometimes, so hopefully I did make a bit of sense. But it was such a fantastic treat having you on and to pick your brains, so to speak, in terms of your experiences and your thoughts and your advice that you give there. So I think, on behalf of the whole community, thank you very much for coming along this evening.
Oh, it's been my pleasure, and I hope I didn't ramble too much too.
No, you did much better than me, trust me. Just before we go, is there any way that we can keep in touch with what's happening with Graham? Like, is there a website or a mailing list or some projects that we should keep an eye on in the near future?
Yes, we'll have a website, which is grahamjesse.com.au.
Yep.
Like I mentioned, Andrew Robertson has been doing some tracks. There's another one of those coming up very soon.
Cool.
Yeah, I've been writing a bit. A friend of mine, David Stratton, the bass player, has just recently rediscovered some tracks we recorded a long time ago down at Bundanon, which is an artist retreat down in the Shoalhaven. So they actually sound pretty good. We might do a mix of them and put them out.
Nice.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, for those who are watching this post the live stream, I will post links to that in the description below. Yeah, I think, again, thank you very much, Graham. I think that's more than a generous amount of your time for this evening. So thank you again. And until next time, I guess we will see you all down the track for the next Q&A.
Absolutely. Maybe see you on a gig sometime.
Well, even better.
Hopefully,
even better. All right. Until then, stay safe, stay well,
You
and
too.
we will see you soon. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Cheers.
Cheers.